Hello, and welcome back to Pierre the Chef. We're doing a different sort of episode today with what's been going on in the world. When Steve and Pierre and I started out with setting up the show, we decided that we were generally going to do about one show a month unless events warranted something else. And with what's happening in Charlottesville, we've decided that events warrant. So we're doing a somewhat different show. We're going to stay just on that one topic as much as possible instead of being all over the map like we usually are. We're going to actually make an effort to stay on topic. Right, Steve?
Yes, and I want to reassure everybody, don't worry, because over the next hour, these two white people are going to fix racism.
Yes, we're going to fix it. You're setting the standard a little bit high here, considering we average just 1,000 views per show.
Well, I wanted to acknowledge that we're going to talk about Charlottesville and some of the attached issues that are very deeply entrenched, painful issues, especially painful for people who don't look like us. So we are two white people who are going to be discussing racism, and I just wanted to acknowledge that is inherently something of a problem.
Yeah, which is very fair. It's very fair to make that point because we were discussing that before we went on the air too, and there's a bit of awkwardness on that. Yeah. Now, this also means that we're not going to be doing our normal 5 minutes of Trump segment like we normally do, because there's not much point. Trump ties in very strongly to this as well, so we're going to be skipping that. So it's a very special episode of Blossom, is what we're saying. Yeah. I never watched Blossom, actually.
Not directed by Bill Bixby, unfortunately. Because
yes. So we've got me, of course, since I've been blathering on, I'm here, and Steve is here. And hey, remember a couple of elections ago when Sarah Palin said she'd be good at national defense because she was real close to Alaska was real close to Russia?
I do remember that.
Well, yeah. So that's that Republican logic. Your insight is going to be much more valuable than mine because I'm in Pennsylvania, but you're in Maryland, so you're much closer to the scene of events.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. So, I have a special insight to offer because I'm only one state away
instead of two. Yes. So that's our Republican logic moment for the day. And Pierre is not here partly because of the fact that 18 hours ago we didn't even know we were doing a show, so it's kind of short notice, but also because he is not actually a U.S. citizen. He's French. He's a legal alien, legal resident of the United States, but he's a non-citizen. With what's going on this topic, he's kind of fearing for his life a little bit if he gets real vocal about this, which is a terrible state of affairs for it to actually be at that point, but that's actually kind of where we stand right now. It's kind of a scary thing right now. I mean, nobody's ever going to mistake Pierre for being anything other than white, but still, it's
once he opens his mouth, the show's over. I mean,
yeah. So, and this Charlottesville thing, this has been planned for a while, hasn't it? I mean,
you mean the Nazi rally?
Yeah, I was going to phrase it. Where did this all begin? But white supremacy began a long, long time ago. I don't think
1776, 1492. Yeah. That's when it began. 1492. This particular event in Charlottesville has been planned, I think, for about a month, maybe a little bit longer. It was instigated, I guess, by when the Charlottesville City Council ruled, I think in May, maybe in June, but relatively recently, that they were going to remove the Robert E. Lee statue. And for some reason, even though the Confederacy totally wasn't the racist white supremacist state, it was just about states' rights and Southern pride, all the racists got really mad about Robert E. Lee's statue being taken out. So they planned this event, and we, on Friday and yesterday we saw what happened.
Yeah, and it's horrific, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And yet completely predictable and expected in its own horrible way. I mean, it's not like any of this is unsurprising. It's not like the behaviors are really that far off what we could have expected would happen.
No, and sadly, neither has the reaction to much of it been terribly surprising. For instance, the reluctance among many mainstream media outlets to call the guy driving his car through the crowd of counter protesters, which resulted in like 20 injuries and 1 death. They're being very reluctant to call that a terrorist attack. Even though a few months ago, when someone who who did the exact same thing in the name of ISIS. Nobody was too slow to call that a terrorist attack. Yeah, that was definitely a terrorist attack. But when a white person does it to counter protesters at what can only be described as a neo-Nazi rally, that's what that was. Then somehow it's like, well, we have to look into his motivations, and we're not sure, and so yeah, that unfortunately has also been very predictable, because that's what always happens.
Yeah, wasn't there something with the Standing Rock protests where Dakotas or Minnesota or other states somebody put forth a bill that suggests that running over protesters wouldn't even be a crime, or would be a very minor crime, slap on the wrist.
Yeah. And it's telling, I've heard this so many times, and to me, it's one of those things that's like, it's an indicator. It's a red flag, let's just say, when somebody says this, when somebody raises this argument, because when you talk about people having a protest and taking to the streets and doing a march where major streets are blocked off and closed to traffic, and people can't get through, and they say, well, that's a terrible safety risk, blocking off the streets like that. What if an ambulance needs to get through? What if police needs to get through? And I don't know if anybody.
I would imagine they would move for emergency vehicles.
They move, which is what happens. That's what actually happens. But
that was a hard one. See, solving this is easy.
If an ambulance needs to get through, they move. I've seen it happen. It happened at the Women's March.
And then once the ambulance goes through, the people crowd back.
They close back around. Yeah. That's what happens. But it just shows that, and you're so quick to think of an excuse for why they shouldn't be allowed to do it. And you don't spend any time thinking about the reason that they're doing it in the first place, and why they are doing something in such a way that will inconvenience people, because that's the whole point. When these people piss and moan about all these protesters, I don't know why they can't just do it in a park somewhere where they're out of everybody's way. That's not the point.
The point, you have to get attention to some extent. You have to. And I did I saw an explanation online where somebody was saying, people are doing these protests because they are not being heard, because they are being ignored, because they have been inconvenienced by society for, through racism, through sexism, for generations. And so they do something that inconveniences you, so you can't get through traffic, you get delayed, and 30 minutes of stuck in traffic, and you're ready to run people over. Yeah.
And, I think it's also worth mentioning that for the last 3 years, Black folks mostly in the United States have been doing these street protests in response to people being murdered by police, who, for the most part, in almost every case, face no repercussions. Or a police officer can flat out murder a Black person, and
it's happened many times on film, on camera, national news, and nothing happens.
Yeah, over and over again, it's happened, and if it's happened so many times just the last couple of years on camera, imagine how often it's happened throughout the history of this country. It's unfathomable, and that's why Black Lives Matter and people supportive of that movement have taken to the streets and stopped traffic and tried to raise an alarm. And when Black Lives Matter does that, there are police snipers on rooftops surveying the crowd of peaceful protesters.
They had that in Ferguson, where peaceful protesters, not a hint of violence. There were undercover police officers trying to incite violence. One person was like a police officer, but didn't identify himself as a police officer, was trying to rally up crowds in Ferguson, trying to get them to start becoming violent. You got snipers on roofs, armed guards, riot gear, tear gas, people getting arrested without any violence. But here we have a bunch of neo-Nazis with torches who were told to bring body armor, bring guns, marching through town, and nobody did a goddamn thing about it.
Yeah, and incredibly mild police presence.
Yeah, I mean, they stood back and watched. If it had been Black people marching with guns and torches, they would have opened fire.
Yeah, or chucked out the tear gas as soon as they started showing up. I mean, there's no comparison when you look at it. Just imagine, just flip flip the race from white to black and make, instead of neo-Nazis and neo-Confederates, they're Black Panthers or Black separatists of some other stripe, whatever, some kind of frowned upon black group. And just try to imagine both the media and the local police behaving with such restraint. If there was a crowd of a couple hundred black folks carrying torches through the streets of a southern town, it's the double standard is shocking. I do want to point out, however, even though I'm disappointed but not surprised by the very light, mild hand that the local police took. The mayor of the city of Charlottesville and the governor of the state of Virginia both came out unequivocally, very strongly, and condemned the Nazis, condemned the white supremacists for their display, and stated just in very unequivocal terms that those attitudes and people who hold those attitudes are not welcome, are not, should not feel as though they are, supported by the state or by the city. And I think that to me is just bare minimum.
Right. Which is a hell of a lot more than you can say for the federal response, where Trump is like, there's hate on all sides. Because white supremacy is a huge amount of his foundation, and he knows it, and he won't alienate them. There's a thing going around about how it'd be nice if he could show as much emotion, as much hostility toward Nazis as he could toward Nordstrom for not carrying his daughter's line of handbags anymore. Yeah. But on Facebook, I have posted a number of things, reposted a number of them, but probably the only one that I would actually call like insightful or on my part to any extent, like original, was one where it says that where the president had tweeted, "We all must be united and condemn all that hate stands for." I said that I think he's got that backwards. We actually have to do it the other way. We have to condemn all that stands for hate. Right, exactly. We have to condemn the Nazis, the white supremacists, all that sort of thing. And then I point to look at the current administration's direction, because the current administration is packed with white supremacists and Nazi sympathizers, and it's just, this is 2017. Yeah. Well, and the Trump supporters, they'll say, well, he came out and he condemned it. What more do you people want? Well, I'd like him to actually mean it, for starters. Yeah, I would like to think that he actually means it, which I don't believe for a second. I think at best he doesn't care. You know what I mean? I think that's probably the most likely scenario. I don't necessarily think that Trump is an avowed, determined, conscious white supremacist. Well, no, just like most people aren't avowed, conscious racists. No, we just they aren't even aware of it. It's not. They think that they're being even-handed when they're very clearly not. Right. We have biases and double standards that we're not even conscious of most of the time. But Trump, I just think Trump doesn't care. I just think and I think you see that in that press conference he gave yesterday, which was after it was confirmed that someone had died. Right, someone was dead as a result of one of those assholes driving a car through a group of people. So someone had been killed during this Nazi rally, and Trump knew that. That was all over the news by the time he gave his press conference. Didn't he bail on the conference when he was asked about that? Yeah, well, he gave a brief sort of perfunctory statement at the beginning that was basically just a repeat of his tweet, like, oh, the hate has to stop, and then he bragged about his economic record. Because that was the original purpose of the press conference. And why? Come on, why deviate from the original purpose of the press conference just because someone was killed by a Nazi in Charlottesville? And then at the very end, as he was wrapping things up, a reporter said, do you want the support of white supremacists? And he left. He didn't answer the question. And which is just as well, because we already know the answer to the question. Right. The answer is yes, of course he does. Why else would he behave in the way he does? Of course he wants the support of white supremacists. He was courting them throughout the entire campaign. He continues to court them. And it's another thing that, like, when we talk about things that are
upsetting, but not necessarily surprising. People I know, Jared Yates Sexton has been doing great work. He's a reporter, and he's been doing great work he's been covering the Trump administration all along, and he was covering Charlottesville over the past couple of days and tweeting about it and posting reports to the Washington Post about it. And he was watching the Trump press conference and was just like in shock by how callous it was, because this was the president of the United States who just made just a very generic sort of, oh, hate is bad, and then went straight into bragging about how great the economy is under his administration. And
even though his administration hasn't passed anything economic.
Yeah, even though, yeah, exactly. He has absolutely nothing to do with
Obama inertia.
Yeah, so he's bragging about imaginary accomplishments.
Oh, really? He's never done that before.
He's bragging about his imaginary accomplishments in the wake of a fatal terrorist attack in an American city during a Nazi rally that took place under his administration. And I don't know. It's one of those things where, yes, it's very disappointing, and it's very upsetting and shocking and infuriating, but it's not surprising, because Donald Trump would brag about his own imaginary accomplishments from the gates of Auschwitz if he had the opportunity. I mean, I have no doubt of that. He is the most shameless, unethical, amoral human being probably to ever occupy the presidency. And that's saying something, because we've had some pretty amoral, dubious presidents from time to time in the history of this country. I cannot, and certainly in my lifetime, for all of their failings as people, for all of their failings as presidents, I cannot imagine Ronald Reagan acknowledging a deadly attack on Americans for like 2 minutes and then going in to brag about his economic policy in the same speech. I cannot imagine him doing that. I cannot imagine George H.W. Bush doing that, or Bill Clinton, or George W. Bush, or Barack Obama doing that. It is unfathomable to me that any of those men would stand in front of a camera the same day that someone was killed at a white supremacist rally in the United States and just kind of wave it off and say, oh yeah, it's bad, hate's bad, everybody does it, and then start bragging about his accomplishments.
All of them had some sort of grasp of the responsibility of the office and what it stood for, and Trump just sees it as like an achievement to unlock.
Yeah, and it's his personal achievement. It has nothing to, it's all about him, and it would be bad enough if he was actually accomplishing things as president. But he has accomplished nothing. He has accomplished absolutely nothing as president. And yet he still insists on making everything about him, even when it's something that is happening in the immediate aftermath of one of the largest public gatherings of avowed white supremacists in decades.
Haven't people estimated this is the largest white supremacist demonstration since the Klan marched on DC in the 1920s?
Yeah, which, I mean, in a way that's kind of, in a backhanded way, that's encouraging, because the march on DC was tens of thousands of people, and the Charlottesville was a couple hundred at most of actual Nazis that were there, and a large crowd of counter protesters. So in a way, that's kind of good. It's like, oh, so they're resurgent, but they're still not quite, up to their peak yet. But
that's the silver lining on the dark cloud. Yeah,
exactly. Let's not focus on that, because a lot of people are saying that. A lot of people are saying like, well, look, we should just ignore them. It was a couple hundred people. We're making too big a deal out of it.
Ignoring them is really making them go away, isn't it?
Yeah. Ignoring them really helps. I mean,
you do the same thing with disease. If you ignore the infection, it goes away on its own.
Exactly. Isn't that the best treatment? Just ignore it.
Yeah. Oh, you have to treat it with antibiotics. If it gets really bad, you have to excise it. That's how infections work.
Yeah. I mean, it's I keep coming back to, obviously this problem is as old as European settlement on this continent. It predates the founding of this current country. It predates the incorporation of the colonies. It started from the moment that white Europeans set foot in this hemisphere, basically.
Right.
And so it's not, it's not a new problem, but I keep coming back to the fact that this particular incident was instigated by not the threat of violence, not the threat of death, not any kind of real discrimination that these people face, because they face none on the basis of their race. Absolutely none.
The only discrimination they're facing, or they see as discrimination, the only problem they have is that they have to share the microphone.
Yeah, yeah. And what instigated it was that somebody was going to take down a statue of a man who probably should have been hanged.
An insurrectionist who went to war against the United States.
Yeah, I mean, there
are other people who've gone to war against the United States. We don't put up statues of them.
No,
they don't put a statue of Osama bin Laden on the in the Capitol building, because it's
yeah. Well, come on, we want to be open-minded.
He attacked the United States. Robert E. Lee went to war. The whole point of the Confederacy is they didn't want to be Americans anymore.
Yeah, and they wanted, and it was because they wanted to keep their slaves. Yes, that's why they didn't want to be Americans anymore.
Well, people say, well, it had to do with economic issues. Yes, the economics of having slave labor rather than paying for labor.
Yes, yes. You can't.
It's very easy to dismiss it as economics when your relatives aren't the currency.
Exactly. No matter what excuse you make, and neo-Confederates and lost causers and apologists have made so many excuses, but no matter what excuse you make, it always reduces down to slavery. That was what the Civil War was started about. And they say, oh, but well, Lincoln said that he would have left the slaves in bondage if it would have preserved the Union. That's not relevant. The conflict was the result of slavery. I know Abraham Lincoln wasn't an abolitionist at the beginning of the war. Like, I know that. Maybe he was in his heart, but he certainly wasn't politically. He wasn't campaigning for, the end of slavery. I know that. That's not the point. The point is the war was fought over slavery. That's why they seceded. In fact, the first states seceded because they were afraid that Lincoln would try to free the slaves. That was explicitly their reason.
Yeah,
because Lincoln wasn't. Yeah, go ahead.
The Confederacy does talk about like the person who made the Confederate flag design that you see flying everywhere explicitly stated that it was to explicitly expressed racist sentiments about the superiority of the white man and keeping them in their proper place at the top of control.
Yeah.
It is explicitly racist and explicitly pro-slavery.
Yeah, there's no getting around it. I mean, you can try, and there are people who really want to believe that and will just buy into that. But I mean, it's if you compare, and Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a really excellent article last week for The Atlantic about Confederate, the upcoming HBO series, the latest in a long line of alternate history pieces of fiction, where I wonder what would have happened if the South would have won, and of course black folks are like, oh, another one.
Yeah,
that's not suspicious at all. That white folks keep fantasizing about if the South had won the Civil War. That doesn't make us all incredibly uncomfortable. But he dealt not only with the problems with that premise, but also with just the cultural context of it. And he made the point that we in the years and decades following the Civil War, especially after the Reconstruction period had ended, people started erecting statues of Confederate heroes. Many of them went on to serve in the federal government, were elected to Congress, in some cases were reelected to seats in Congress that they held before they seceded, were appointed to positions in presidential administrations. And these were not just, run-of-the-mill rank-and-file soldiers, right? These were generals. These were officers in the Confederate Army, an army that was in rebellion against the United States. Another word for that would be traitors.
Yeah.
And instead of being imprisoned or hanged,
they were sent back to government. They were sent back to
the government they seceded from, and they were made icons. They were made idols. They were made heroes. They were they were erected statues. And so the problem, these
it never went away. Nothing ever changed.
The problem is that those statues were ever there to begin with. That's the problem. It's not that, that's a deeper symptom of the problem.
Yeah. It was a couple months ago where some of the statues to Confederates and to the Confederate soldiers and generals were being removed, and they had to be removed at night by a company that had unmarked vehicles, and they had armed police escorts and snipers around in case anyone attacked them for removing the Confederate tributes under the cover of darkness, because they're that emphatic about it.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing about conservatives about this sort of thing is that they never ever give up, no matter how ridiculous things are, no matter how terrible it is, no matter how badly they're beaten. They still stand their ground and insist that nothing is going to change their mind on anything, and they keep fighting the same battles. And you know, if you're more on the left side of things, we have this tendency to win a battle and say we've done good, and we stop there for a while and we rest, and then they chip away and things backslide, and we don't do as well as don't do as well overall or get as much progress as we want, because we go in fits and spurts, and they're just a constant avalanche of attack. Because I think when Obama was elected president, that was a great thing, and it was one of the I don't want to say glass ceiling isn't the right term, but it's one of those things that you never ever thought was going to happen. I mean, it was even joked about on House that there may be a black president, but and that show was still on the air when Obama got elected.
Right.
And I think that to a lot, here I'm going to take the risk of speaking for a demographic I'm not part of, but I think a large part white people, we looked at that and said, we've done good. We're helping to turn the tide. We're making a better world. We're making a change here. And I think a lot of black people are like, bitch, please, you're not changing anything.
Right. Because we hadn't lived through it.
Right. And now we see the backlash.
Yeah.
We said we've done good, and we stopped pushing, and then Republicans got back, Congress, and they got back control of a lot of different things. And then we had this election, and the white supremacists came out en masse, and now we have Donald Trump, who probably would have been great president for the Confederacy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He would have fit in better there. I mean, to the extent that he could be a great president of anything, because he's, appalling and terrible. But
if the Confederacy needed a president who had absolutely no acumen for governing at all, he would have been a really good choice.
But this is his America. When he was elected, the next morning, Klanmen were standing on bridge overpasses waving flags, and they were saying our time is coming again. And there were people, I saw a video from inside a school where people were holding up a Trump Pence banner and shouting white power as they walked through the high school. And people at the rally in Charlottesville were actual Nazis and carrying Confederate flags and Nazi flags together and saying, "Hi, oh Trump." I mean, how do you say that this is not racist?
Yeah, and how are you in Trump's position and completely indifferent to it? Because I mean, I know for myself, like I just have a YouTube channel, and a not super popular YouTube channel.
You blow me out of the water.
Well, thank you. But
I mean, damning with faint praise there.
I do okay, but you know what I mean? Like I don't have like 1 million subscribers or anything like that. I don't want to brag on myself as far as my YouTube channel, but that's my position in life. That's where I am in the pecking order. If I noticed that my videos were attracting a significant portion of support from open, blatant, brazen white supremacists, I would think, what the fuck am I doing wrong?
It'd be a moment for self-reflection, which he's not capable of.
What am I saying? What am I doing that is making these Nazis think that I'm one of them? And I would immediately try to figure out what it is and stop doing it and make it clear that I was not one of them. And I can tell you that that's what I would do, because that's what I did when the anti-feminism thing started. People talk about how, like, why did you change? I didn't change. But I started talking about it more because I saw so many other YouTubers who were coming out and being just absolutely brazen, shitty anti-feminists. And part of it was, I want to make sure that people don't group me in with them. That I don't want to be a part of that, because I think that's revolting and disgusting and inexcusable.
Well, only because it is.
Only because it is. And for Trump to have that same problem only magnified millions of times, and on a national stage, a global stage, really. And to be completely, just to shrug it off, and, well, you know, whatever. I don't even.
But that's because he doesn't have any perspective outside of himself. It's what's good for him and what he wants, and everything else needs to conform to that, or is the enemy, or it gets ignored.
Yeah,
he's not capable of that sort of self-reflection. He's like, all he sees is that these people are supporting me. How do I continue getting that support? And he doesn't really care how or why it happens.
Yeah, and he's so narcissistic that he figures if they support him, they must not be so bad, right? Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, they like me, so there must be something good about him because I'm great. You know, and yeah, I mean, and he plays dumb when he gets backed into a corner and he can't offer any other excuse. He just pretends that he doesn't know what's going on, like with David Duke last year.
The David Duke thing is a classic one where
I don't know who he is.
Yeah, what a load of crap.
I don't know who he is.
Well, such a brazen liar too. I mean, how can you lie about such obvious things? I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that we've reached this point. I mean, this is somebody who has absolutely no business being any position in government. I wouldn't make a good dog catcher. And
no,
here he's the president of the United States, and he's threatening nuclear war against other countries. And when a political leader becomes very unpopular and is under assault from forces, they're seeing they're under assault and they're becoming less popular, their last refuge is a war.
Yeah.
So I think we should be very, very afraid right now.
Yeah. Well, and with the North Korea thing, just to go off on a brief tangent, I mean, look at history, because what North Korea is doing now is not any different than what North Korea has done ever since the Kims took over, right? They've from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, they've all had the same act where they do something aggressive, they do something transgressive to get people's attention, to get people to go, oh shit, North Korea. And then the rest of the world pays attention to them and calms them down, gives them a pat on the head, gives them some economic aid or whatever, or lifts some sanctions or something, to keep that contemptible regime afloat. And then the cycle repeats itself. Now, that is not an ideal situation, especially for the people of North Korea. But
at the very least, it's stable.
Yeah, it's stable, and it's better than nuclear war. And so the same thing is happening now, again, only Trump is in charge. And instead of keeping a level head and saying, let's let the diplomats handle this, he's got a crying kid, and instead of saying calm down, he's saying, I'll give you something to cry about. Yeah, exactly. And he has to wave his dick around and make sure everybody knows that he's the big man, and they better knock it off or they're gonna know something. And it's like he's like the parent constantly counting to 3, and everybody, but except 3 is a nuclear exchange.
Yeah.
And, and it's just, not only is it reckless and incredibly scary for people who feel like they might be casualties of a nuclear exchange, but it's ahistorical, because North Korea isn't doing anything that it hasn't done many, many times before. And Trump is not reacting to it in the most intelligent way, because Trump doesn't know that. Trump doesn't know anything about history. Trump doesn't know anything about diplomacy or
and they've said that when they try to teach him these things, that he can't stay focused for more than about 2 minutes. So they have to try to get the point across in under 2 minutes, or else he starts tuning them out because he just doesn't care.
Yeah, they have to wave like ice cream in front of his face and be like, hey, come on. Listen to a little bit.
They said they put his name into it. They try to put pictures of him looking leaderful or heroic or whatever to try to keep his attention up, because it's all about his golden ego.
Yeah. Yep. And he gets Nazis really excited, and he doesn't care. He doesn't care. Everybody, I mean, I don't know. Like, if I were a presidential candidate and somebody came to me and said, the Nazis love you, I mean, I might fucking just drop out of the race. Like, isn't that the responsible thing? If you truly care about your fellow humans and you truly care about the future of your country, if you're running for president and you find out that a huge base of your support is fucking Nazis, I mean, wouldn't the best thing to do be, you know what? I think maybe I'm the wrong person for this job.
You would think so, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
That's sort of the summary of everything. Here we are. This is a disaster. We're what? We're 7, 8. I guess we're technically 7 months into the administration.
Yep. Yep. Nazi rallies.
41 months to go.
Looming nuclear war. Yeah. Well, hopefully not. I mean, if here's what I'm hoping.
There've been a lot of jokes that Pence thought he'd be president by now already.
Yeah. I'm sure Pence thought he would be president by now. That's probably why he took the VP job. He was like, "Come on, what is?"
Well, he's already hiring like his new chief of his own personal chief, whatever, as a campaign manager. So you figure that there's going to be heavy running against Trump, and won't it be interesting to see if Trump still has Republican support at that point, if it gets to that point?
I mean,
Republican voter. But
if Trump,
but a lot of his appeal comes from the fear of change. He spends a lot of time saying, your way of life is disappearing.
Yeah,
and the fact is, for a lot of it, the way of life is disappearing, and that's and that's a scary thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing overall, but it's a scary thing, and people don't adapt to it well. I mean, just as a small example, in the school district where I live, there's a plant called Technoglass, and they made picture tubes for televisions. Yeah, and it's a big employer in the area, and I was told by the music teacher we had at that point, they had a contract with a Japanese television company that they would pick and choose which ones met their quality standards and use them, and then the rest they had a contract with an American TV company. And the teacher said, you put the Japanese company and the American company TVs next to each other, and you can see the difference. For the Japanese have a higher standard, but as we all know, time has gone by. You don't get glass picture tube televisions anymore. We came up with something better, something cheaper, something less energy intensive, and they went away. And Technoglass went under, and the plant sits empty, and everyone lost their jobs. And that is a bad thing for them. And it's a tough thing to know that is gone, and there's no chance that it's coming back. Now, it's good overall. People across the country aren't going to go back to glass picture tubes just to help a small industry.
Yeah.
But, he's appealing to this sort of thing, that they have a legitimate fear of change, of unknown, of having their usefulness become deprecated. They are productive. They do work that they can't do it anymore because there's no demand for it. And Trump is telling these people that, especially in coal mining, seems to be the big one with this, that we will have your back. We will maintain your way of life, and it's not feasible.
No.
And it has to be scary to be the person who's going to lose your job and have your life skill amount to nothing anymore and have to start over from scratch.
Yeah, of course. It's very scary. But
that's the politics of fear. It's just another form of it.
But being resistant to the change doesn't make it any better. I mean, but that's the lie that Trump tells, and not just Trump, but conservatives in general. That's the most seductive lie of political conservatism is you don't have to change. Things don't have to change. Things can stay just the way they are. Yeah, it inevitably, as the culture moves from one generation to the next, change is inevitable, and change most of the time is good. There are times when change is not a good thing. There are times when maybe it happens a little too fast and people suffer needlessly for it. But there are also lots of times when change doesn't happen nearly fast enough, and people suffer for it.
Ferguson and Charlottesville and any number of other places.
Yeah, when a serious problem is clearly identified and solutions don't seem forthcoming, even though it's undeniable that the problem exists. But you don't have the option to not change. I'm sorry. I know that hurts people sometimes. I know people I like things the way they are. A lot of us like things the way they are, but things aren't going to stay this way forever. That's just a fact of life.
There's a comfort zone, but life is not going to stay in that zone.
Yeah. And you can make it easier on yourself by being open-minded enough and flexible enough to be able to roll with those changes. And
or
it
you can
doesn't.
stamp your feet and wave torches and say white people forever.
Yeah, and you're still going to wind up living in the changed world,
right?
Whether you like it or not. You'll end up being, you'll be a pariah in your own society. Eventually, you'll be ostracized.
You'll make the change more painful and more bloody and more violent, and a lot more people will suffer before you get there. But you're going to get there.
Yeah, exactly. And when people do get there, people like you who tried to hold it back at any cost, by any means necessary, will be vilified, and rightly so. I mean, there's a very good reason why a lot of us think that the Confederacy was one of the great shames in the history of our country. Why it's our equivalent of the.
Not just that it happened, but the fact that so many people are still so goddamn proud of it.
Yeah, there's a reason why we should be ashamed of that and embarrassed by it.
And Germany does not allow the Nazi flag is completely illegal in Germany. You're not allowed to. They have this video games that are sold in Germany. They have to edit the Nazi flag out of if they take place in that era. You can't sell it. They are ashamed of their past, and they have taken steps to correct it. We're not ashamed of ours.
Yeah. And I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that Germany today is not a far better society for it. And I don't think that German society is suffering because it took a hard line against Nazism. I don't think you'd find very many. You'd find some, because there are neo-Nazis in Germany, but not very many. And you would be hard pressed to find a modern day German, especially someone who was born post World War II, who would say that, oh no, we should probably cut the Nazis some slack, because Germany post-war did a pretty good job of making sure that people understood that the Third Reich was an abomination and was something that future generations needed to make up for and needed to do what it could to ensure didn't happen again. And as you said, with the Confederacy, we didn't do that. The Confederacy was America's Third Reich. There's no other way to say that.
Yeah, basically, Germany does not have statues around of Hitler and Himmler and Mengele and all of them. They don't keep their insurrectionists and their monstrous, now that they don't keep the symbols of that around. They don't take pride in it. They don't display their past and say with pride.
Yeah, it's part of our heritage.
There's places where you go to learn about it, but it's not taught as something to be proud of. It's part of it's not necessarily heritage. It's part of their history, but it's a history that they disavow to the extent that they don't support it. They acknowledge it and they try to learn from it. And we're just like, fly the flag. It's heritage. It's not racist. But it's so clearly
because we pretend that to not fly the flag, to not put up those statues, would be to erase history. That's one of the arguments. They say, well, you can't change history. Well, I'm not saying that they shouldn't teach the Civil War in history classes. I'm not saying that people shouldn't write books about the Civil War, that we shouldn't learn about the Confederacy. Obviously, we should, and we need to learn more about it than most of us.
The Constitution says slaves count as 3/5 of a person. We can't change that history, but we're not going back to that.
No, we left it in. We crossed it out, but we left it in so people could see it and they could go, "Whoa, holy shit! Seriously, 3/5 of a person? That's what it used to say." Because it's important that we know that that's where we come from. We don't ignore it. Some of us ignore it, but the evidence is still there. It hasn't been obliterated from history. But yeah, in the case of the Confederacy, the problem is, as I said on Twitter yesterday, is that the fall of the Confederacy led to the putting up of far too many statues and far too few gallows. Yeah. I mean, the officers of the Nazi Empire were arrested and were tried for war crimes and were imprisoned or executed. That did not happen with the Confederacy. And
the Germans didn't reelect Hermann Göring to their leadership,
No, they didn't. They didn't even have the option. They said, no, that's not an option. You can't vote for any of those people.
I think Dave Barry described best. He said a Reconstruction was an era in which the South was transformed from a totally segregated region where blacks had no rights to a totally segregated region where blacks were supposed to have rights but didn't.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that's really the most tragic thing about the Civil War, is that ultimately it settled very little. I mean, it accomplished the destruction of the legal institution of slavery, which is nothing to sneeze at, certainly, but the institutionalized racism and the broader sort of general casual cultural racism that enabled slavery to exist for so long in the first place was maintained. And you know, and in that sense, you could look at the Civil War and think, well, God, we really we really could have gotten a lot more out of that than we did. You know, that could have been a moment where we, you know, where we said, you know what, we're really going to change. We're not just going to free the slaves. We're going to make this a better country. We're gonna fight this intolerance, and we're going to build a better, freer, more equal society for everybody. And we didn't really do that.
Yeah, it's not like a lot of work, so we just didn't bother.
We freed the slaves. We said 40 acres and a mule. Here you go. Have a nice life.
And now we export our slavery.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know other countries have slaves. We could just buy our shit from them.
Yep, it's slavery by proxy. We banned it here, but we have economic, which works just as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and we left that little that little exception in the constitutional amendment for prisoners. We can still get our slave labor out of prisoners. So
yeah, so you create a demand for prisoners, you get people in prison, then company profits out of that, then you can create your labor for 15 cents an hour to make all your shit, and ta-da, you're competitive.
Yeah. And it's good, because as long as you're making money, that's all that matters.
That's very libertarian.
Because the yeah, exactly, as you would know, having you dove all the way to the bottom of that fucking.
Oh yeah.
Well, you know, there's one other thing I want to mention, one other issue related to this, and we've touched on it, you know, like here and there throughout the conversation, but I really want to spend a few minutes directly addressing it. The people who say that both sides do it.
For crying out loud, you know, that's false equivalency. You know, and in fact, we can put this, you know, with insurance. There's two different concepts called comparative negligence and contributory negligence. Mm-hmm. And contributory used to be very common, and basically what it was that if you had any percent of responsibility for an incident that occurred, it wouldn't have happened without your contribution, and therefore you could not collect any damages for it. If you contributed, you got zero. If you had left something plugged in and some lazy workman had, you know, tripped over it and caused a fire because they were carrying, you know, propane tank, you know, whatever it is, if you contribute in any way, you left that cord there, you got nothing. And that was considered so ridiculous that eventually that's pretty much gone in the United States. It's comparative. If you were 10% responsible, you can only collect 90% of damages instead of zero. This whole thing about trying to create these false equivalencies is like, yeah, this person is a Nazi who's calling for the complete genocide of an entire race of people, but this person said some nasty things and then punched him in the head, so they're completely equal. And that is such bullshit. And it's, you know, comparative. You know, it's not, these things are not nearly on the same scale.
No. Well, and there's an attitude.
You had peaceful counter protesters who got run over by a car.
Yeah. So yeah, how is it both sides? Exactly. Well, and not only that, but you know, Trump said there's hate from all sides. Where's the hate from anti-Nazi protesters? Who are they hating exactly? You know, who the Black Lives Matter protesters? Who are they hating? What group of people are they hating in the way that white supremacists are promoting intolerance and hatred and vilification of people of color? I don't see, because they'll say, oh, white people. No, I've never seen a Black Lives Matter activist or a black activist in general promote a message that was out and out hatred of white people. I've seen them acknowledge the oppression that people face as a result of white supremacy. I've seen them point out things that white people commonly say and do that are incredibly problematic, that work to reinforce that white supremacy. But I have never seen the equivalent of a Nazi who expresses just absolute vile sentiments about black folks and Latinx folks and Jewish people and anybody that he considers other than him.
Yeah.
I've never seen that equivalent.
And it's also the moving goalposts that they keep changing. It's like, well, can't they have can't black people have a protest without rioting and violence? So they have a peaceful one, and then you have the complaints that they're still being disruptive, and they keep citing it back. Don't be respectful. Don't start violence. Don't. So okay, Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah,
like, well, not like that. Fuck him.
Yeah, not during the national anthem, please. I beg you.
Yeah, it's like whatever the protest is, there's a way that it's not acceptable.
Yeah,
marching through town. White supremacists marching through town with torches, both tiki torches.
Yeah,
and calling for white people to rise back to their rightful place. That's perfectly acceptable. But black person taking a knee during the national anthem, no, that's not. Well, he's not showing proper respect to the country. Well, the country is currently being led by white supremacists. So that's kind of fundamental to the protest.
He knows that's why he's doing it.
Yeah,
because the country isn't showing proper respect to him and people like him. That's sort of the point. And even people will say, like, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in these situations. People, they act like arguments are totally interchangeable. Like if one side does it and you can imagine someone from the other side doing it, then therefore both sides are the same. That completely ignores context. I mean, even because of course there have been cases throughout history where there have been black separatist groups in the US. There have been black separatist groups that have encouraged violence, and that obviously is something that we should discourage and should never be encouraged or tolerated. But you have to look at the context when a group of people who have been held down and held back and subjected to institutionalized violence for centuries in this country. And even when laws are passed supposedly giving them their rights and their equality, they still are unable to take advantage of that. They are still prevented from living as full, free, equal people in their own country. While it's regrettable that some feel the need to turn to violence as a result of that, it is far more understandable than a white person who has, racially speaking, been given every advantage possible doing the exact same thing. They are not comparable at all. A black person who feels driven to the edge and turns to violence, while that violence shouldn't be accepted and shouldn't be tolerated, it is far more justified and understandable than a white person doing the same thing. They are not comparable at all.
Absolutely.
And there's this idea that that the middle is always the most reasonable place to be. Right, that if you can come up with an argument where you can convince yourself and maybe convince some other people that you're not taking a side, that's always the most reasonable place to be, and that is horseshit. This neutrality fallacy.
There are certain things where there's a clear right and a clear wrong. Yeah, it's that. Yeah. Well, you know what? You're sort of human.
Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with the Nazis, but I'm just saying maybe we shouldn't be so quick to condemn them. Or I've heard some of these college.
We really need to give their ideas a chance.
Yeah. I mean, there was I heard that there were some college students in Berkeley who got mad when one of their professors said the N-word. So I think they're the same. I mean, you're right. There are many situations actually where it is completely proper to take a side, where one side is clearly the side that you should be on if you care about things like morality and justice and righteousness. But also, there are situations where you don't have that option. There's no such thing as neutrality. There's pretended neutrality.
There's like one of the ones that really gets me was Tom Brady saying he doesn't really get into politics. He just tries to be a positive guy. It's like, well, that's a very easy stance to take when you're a rich, white, straight, cis sports star, and the entire system is designed to help and support you.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't get involved in politics because I get everything I want.
Exactly.
I don't have to fight for anything. I don't have to want for anything. I've never gone down being told that I'm not allowed to vote because I'm white. That doesn't happen to you.
Yeah. if what you do,
when you when you use politics in that context, what you're saying is I don't care about other people.
yeah, exactly. If what you do or choose, pointedly choose not to do, enables white supremacy, then you're not neutral. You're on the side of white supremacy, whether you want to be or not. That's just it. If you take up for Nazis, if you defend Nazis, you are enabling them. And practically speaking, you are on their side. Even if you disagree with them, even if you shake your fists and stamp your feet and say, but I don't agree with them. But if you're taking their side and you are enabling them and you are helping them to accomplish their goals, then you are on their side.
And that's why the video I did about I'm being okay with punching Nazis, people in this country are living in fear because of people like the ones who are marching. And the people who are marching without fear. They aren't wearing masks anymore.
No
They're marching
hoods.
in public. They're very openly white supremacist and proud of it, and they expect absolutely no consequence because they have absolutely no fear of what they're doing, that there's going to be any backlash or any penalty. And as long as they feel that way, they're going to continue acting this way. This is not something that's acceptable, and it shouldn't be treated as that, but they know that what they're doing is acceptable, that as a society, their voices against it, there are laws against it, but in actual practice, they get a free pass.
Yeah. And in fact, in the example of the Trump administration, they see that there is no limit to how far they can go. There's no stigma. I love when people say, "Oh, you shouldn't call people racist because that really hurts their reputation." Well, I mean, maybe among certain people, but certainly it doesn't put a ceiling on your potential for accomplishment.
But let's just be blunt. The right is powered by racism. I won't say that every single individual is actively racist, but racism is the foundation. Racism is what they are built on, what their policies work on. They have fought the racist battle for decades, and they continue to fight it, and that's where the support comes from. We talk about, we use the term the alt-right. It's not really that different from the right.
No,
it's not that far apart.
No, the alt-right is a name that neo-Nazis and other stripes of white supremacists came up with because they thought that it would be more acceptable. It's a rebranding.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, the policies that are typically supported and pushed for by right-wing politicians, they tend to disproportionately disadvantage Black people and other people of color. They tend to proportionately disadvantage women and immigrants and LGBTQ people and people on low incomes.
And everyone who's not white male.
Yeah, and basically anybody who has any kind of social or political obstacle to overcome. That's just that. I just don't. I don't know how you can deny that. And you're right. They're not consciously racist. Most of them. I think some of them probably genuinely believe when some of them say, like, well, if you're a Black person, you should vote Republican because we're the ones that we create the most opportunity. Like I think they probably genuinely believe that.
Well, there are a lot of people who don't believe that Hillary won the popular vote, even though it's very clear that she did, and not Trump. There are a lot of people who don't believe that Trump Jr. had a meeting with the Russians, even though he publicly admitted to having that meeting with the Russians. Yeah, it's like, what does he know about it?
There are a lot of people who still believe that Catholic priests haven't been molesting children, and the church hasn't been moving them around to protect them. I mean, there are.
And you can't negotiate or reason with people who are not constrained by basic facts and reality.
No, I mean, the sincerity of their belief isn't an excuse.
And so the whole concept of sit down and talk it out and find a common ground is largely pointless because you're never going to accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't reason with somebody who is absolutely convinced that they're the white victim. You see people, I mean, for God's sake, Star Trek Discovery released a trailer and people started screaming about the white genocide because there weren't white men in the captain's seat. I mean,
yeah.
This is not just a difference in belief. This is irrational.
Yeah, it's completely.
And you can't deal with it rationally.
I mean, think about this. All right, we'll just take one example. For anybody who argues that this isn't a white supremacist society, that we live in 2017, and also two, that that white people are some kind of an endangered species. There are just look at Congress as one example. There are 535 members of Congress, combining the House of Representatives and the Senate. 535. The Congressional Black Caucus is 42 people out of 535. 42. How that doesn't at least indicate that black folks specifically are incredibly disadvantaged when it comes to government and legislature. I just, again, it's one of those things that I just, other than just blind spots and prejudice, there's no explanation for it. I mean, it's right there. There are 42 people in the Congressional Black Caucus out of a total of 535. And yet, when a city council says, you know what, we're going to take down that Robert E. Lee statue, we're not cool with that anymore, there is this little uprising of racist white people who are chanting, "You will not replace us," and "Give us our country back," and, you know, talking about how they're being genocided out of existence, which really, for a Nazi to say that, takes some fucking balls, by the way. You know, so it's
what they know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, it's what they do. They, you know, it's sort of like, it's the blending of internet sort of troll meme culture with neo-Nazism, because on the internet, you know, a troll will often accuse, there's a lot of projection, and some of it I think is intentional. You know, they'll accuse other people of doing the thing that they do themselves.
Yeah, I've said for a long time that whenever a Republican makes an accusation, you'll be right more often than not if you treat it as a confession.
Yeah. Because how many times has that turned out to be the case? I mean, yeah.
I mean, some of the whole, you know, they're talking about death panels and healthcare, but Alaska under Sarah Palin actually set up things where medical cases had to be reviewed and people died waiting for them to be reviewed. There were death panels in Alaska on her, but she accused Obama of setting up, and Clinton, you know, of wanting to set up death panels. You know, you hear some of the most aggressively anti-gay legislation comes from people who are later outed.
Yeah, which would be sad if they weren't such pricks. I mean, if their way of dealing with this self-loathing didn't cause so much damage to so many other people. Exactly. You can't feel sympathy for somebody who burns down the house because they, you know, that other people live in because they don't like it. Exactly. And it was just like, you know, you can apply that to the people who were carrying torches and Nazi flags and American Nazi flags, also known as Confederate flags, in Charlottesville. Is that if you take them completely out of their cultural context and you just look at this broken, ignorant, terrified person who doesn't know shit about his own history or his own country, is completely at sea when it comes to his actual place in his own world, and is angry and terrified because he believes that he is being made obsolete and is being passed over by his own country and is losing his heritage and is losing his identity. Just that is very sympathetic and very tragic. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to be a Nazi. Like, it just, I'm sorry, my empathy stops when you say, you know, and it's all black people's fault, or it's all the Jews' fault, or it's all women's fault, or, you know, you have an obligation. When you play the victim card against people who you have been victimizing for generations. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
the only victimization here is a level playing field, that you don't have the advantages anymore, that you don't control who goes on the stage, you don't control who speaks into the microphone. Other people, other voices are being heard, and all of a sudden this is a threat to you.
Yeah, exactly. They say, well, we just think that things, we just believe that things should be merit-based. Well, so do a lot of other people. That's why there are mechanisms in place to correct for white privilege, because it's not merit-based right now. White folks have an advantage. Men have an advantage. You know, heterosexual people and cisgender people have an advantage. So if you want to have a merit-based society, then you need to correct for those unfair, unwarranted advantages. That's the way it works. You can't just say, well, society is just naturally merit-based, so let's not fuck with it. That's not the way it is.
But these are also the same people who say you should be using the word egalitarianism. Well, yeah, that's sort of, but when anyone proposes anything of that nature, all of a sudden it's white genocide.
What a wonderful word that's been completely ruined.
Yeah,
by assholes on the internet. I mean, every time not every time.
That's a much worse ruining than Epic, but Epic has been pretty ruined as well.
Epic, yeah.
I saw videos of Epic, watch Bill Maher's epic takedown of the Republicans, and it was like a 45-second clip, and the only scene of Bill Maher, it was saying, I really don't think the Republicans have the best interests of the American people in mind. That's not Epic.
Ooh.
I'm sorry.
You really told him, didn't you?
Yeah, didn't mean to change the subject there. Sorry.
You really told him that time, Bill. Ooh, are you sure you wanted to say that?
Yeah.
I mean,
egalitarian. The reason that they use feminism is because that helping a specific group up to the level that men already have.
Yes, exactly. If you want to have gender equality, then you need to empower the oppressed group, which would be women. If you want to have racial equality, then you need to empower the oppressed group, which is everybody but white people.
Why is it that people who are critical of feminism refer to them as feminazis as an insult, but don't get upset about actual fucking Nazis?
Actual Nazis, yeah. Like, and that's another thing. All right, let's close with this. Let's close with this, because this is another thing that I've seen people saying, and they've said it for years, but they still say it even in the wake of Charlottesville. Oh, everybody who disagrees with you isn't a Nazi. Okay, that's fair. That's a fair point. But as Kat Black said yesterday on Twitter when she retweeted that picture of the Nazi flag side by side with the Confederate flag at Charlottesville. So can we call them Nazis now? I mean, they're literally carrying Nazi flags. They're doing Nazi chants. They're saying blood and soil.
Yeah, they're carrying the Nazi flag and the Confederate flag together.
Yeah, which is they go together. They're the exact same thing. But they're carrying Nazi flags. They're doing Nazi chants. They're doing the fucking Roman Nazi salute. So what's the threshold we're still waiting for them to cross before we feel comfortable saying they're Nazis? Exactly.
Maybe they have to register with the Nazi party.
Yeah, exactly. They have to know they have to travel back in time and join the German National Socialist Workers Party, because apparently people are unfamiliar with the evolution of speech and the fact that words can take on different senses of meaning. And therefore, if you refer to anyone as a Nazi, who, regardless of their ideology and regardless of their, the trappings of their protests and whatever, if they were not literally a Nazi in Germany during World War II, then it's not fair to call them a Nazi. Yeah.
We really, we need to stop defending. America has this great idea of free speech and openness of ideas, but it's been taken to the extent where we deny the fact that some ideas are just wrong. And some ideas are just unacceptable, and we shouldn't have tolerance for them, and we shouldn't put up with them. And it's not civilized to entertain arguments over whether certain humans actually deserve the rights and benefit of being human, as opposed to being considered substandard or inferior in some way. Those are not reasonable arguments, and those are not arguments that we should be having. Those should be done instead. And pretending that, well, we need to debate this, we have to approve of, we don't have to approve of all ideas, but we have to approve of the expression of them. And No, we don't.
We don't. We don't have to arrest them, but we don't have to just sit back politely and listen to the Nazis shout their Nazi shit. Believe it or not, there are countries, free democratic countries, that have outlawed hate speech, and it's not a perfect system, but they do have a very specific system in place for determining what is hate speech. And of course, there's always an appeals process. So if you think you've been unfairly convicted of using hate speech, you can always appeal like any other crime. That's just the way laws work. But, but even if we don't do that in the United States, and I don't think we will anytime soon, because we have to be, hit in the face with a baseball bat before we recognize that there's a problem. But we probably won't do that. But even if we don't do that, even if we keep our current, attitude about free speech, that doesn't mean that we as citizens have to politely tolerate it when people are spewing absolute garbage, vile, hateful, ignorant, intolerant speech. And what that means is, if you see, first of all, if you have a platform, if you have a talk show, or you own a stage or whatever, and Nazis want to use your platform, you tell them to fuck off. That's number one. And number two,
YouTube listening?
Yeah, just say, no, oh, you're a Nazi? No, fuck you. You don't get to talk on my stage. You don't get to use my microphone. You don't get to sit in front of my camera. And two, if you do see Nazis talking somewhere, do what you can to make sure their message doesn't get out. Be disruptive. Go into their audience and scream and yell. Make them throw you out. Make a scene. Make sure that send the message that people who have these intolerant, hateful, ignorant ideas, that they will not be able to just broadcast these ideas unopposed. Make them feel unwelcome.
Because we can't just sit back and look at Charlottesville and say nothing was wrong until the car plowed into the crowd. It was inevitable that something bad was going to happen because of the group of people involved.
Yes, and the Nazis were the bad guys, and the counter-protesters were the good guys. I mean,
and now a counter-protester is dead because nobody did anything about the Nazis like they would have done if it had been black people marching.
Yeah. So, I just, this false centrism and false neutrality, and this people who are pretending that there's something ambiguous about this, or people who are not just, I mean, anybody who is not outraged at what Trump said is on my shit list, with his fucking, well, both sides do it.
Maybe they're a nice Nazi.
Yeah. Hey, come on, maybe he's
What's that one that went around about how the best Nazis were the people who just kept their head down and didn't say anything? They were the good neighbors. They went about their business. They ignored they were the best Nazis.
The people who could have done something but didn't.
Right.
The people who said, well, look, it's not my business. Well, hey, what can I do? That's the problem. An individual probably can't do much, but a group of people can do something. And if something like Charlottesville were to happen closer to where I live, I feel like I would have to go. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't feel right not going. I wouldn't feel right not standing shoulder to shoulder with the counter protesters, even if all we did was stand there, and just scream at them, and try to shout them down.
Which already makes you a better person than most of your critics.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the president of the United States.
Right.
But then again, back to damning with faint praise we come.
Yes. Shall we wrap it up there then, I guess?
Yeah. Let's wrap it up. We're not gonna talk about silly stuff this time, because
but we do have our regularly scheduled show for next weekend. So we'll be
back to format next weekend for our regularly scheduled monthly show. We just felt like I know we both had some things to get off our chest about this, so we did a little extra one.
Yep. So, and we figured that we couldn't go from a topic about discussion about Nazism and racism and violent protest, and then hop over to talking about Mystery Science Theater or Batman or something. There's a certain issue there.
It's poor taste. It's poor taste.
So we're going to wrap up here, and we sort of covered our 5 minutes of Trump in the general discussion, and we will be back next week with a more normal show, hopefully a slightly lighter topic.
Yeah, hopefully. I think we've got something.
I think so too. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, next week.